right, so welcome. We are really, really excited for all of you to join us this evening. Right now, I'm seeing about 120 people on this webinar. That's awesome. So excited to have you. Welcome to our winter learning series for 2024. We're going to be here every Monday for 12 weeks total, including this one. And we have some amazing speakers that I'm very thankful for that are lined up to tell us about all manner of conservation related issues. Really quickly, before we proceed, Ethan and I wanted to introduce ourselves. This is me. I got a MS in wildlife ecology at Arkansas State University in Jonesboro and worked all over the United States. Was very fortunate to work on a number of different bird species and many different habitat types. And the last job that I had before coming to Missouri was a wonderful job working on prairies in eastern Colorado as a private lands biologist for Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, which was then known as the Rocky Mountain Bird Observatory. Landed here in Missouri in late '08, and Ethan and I co-founded the Missouri River Bird Observatory, MRBO, in 2010.
Great. Thanks, Dana. If you could forward through the slides as I go.
For sure.
But so yeah, great. I'm originally from Western New York and I served in the Air Force and but when I was in Western New York, it was just a beautiful place to grow up, and it really kind of inspired me to really care about the natural world. Where I'm from, it was historically flocks of passenger pigeons would roost in the beech trees there in Western New York, and it was the land of the Senecas and the home of the Iroquois. But I picked up a few computer skills when I went to college and joined the Air Force, and I just kept on using those computer skills all the time, and finally I had the privilege of studying those birds in really cool places, everything like turkeys and grassland birds to warblers and all sorts of things throughout all sorts of really cool places. And every time I was into a bird job, I thought, wow, how can we apply technology to do something good for conservation? And it just kept on happening. Then we co-founded Merbo about 13 plus years ago. I just continued to use that Swiss Army knife of tools for those things. So everything from data collection and analysis workflows to drone imagery. So I just want to harness those things for conservation, and hopefully, hopefully you'll be sort of captivated by this series of webinars that we have here, and see how people have different approaches doing what they can do to help us in the world of birds, and hopefully you'll see all the interconnectedness from all these topics as we try to solve some of our big challenges as we move forward. But just want you to know, each of you has some special gifts, and you can harness for our collective action and help us protect our natural resources. So thank you all for being here.
So here's our Missouri River Bird Observatory tagline: conservation via science, education, and advocacy. And we wanted to say a little bit more about that. Here it is elucidated out a little bit further. So in our science work, we gather information about avian communities and habitat use and populations that assist landowners at many different levels. MRBO itself does not own land. So we use our scientific data collection skills to provide feedback to those who do own and manage land for conservation purposes. We also provide opportunities for people of all ages to learn about species and their habitats and conservation. And a slightly newer pillar of our mission is advocacy. So advocating for sound science-based conservation policies that benefit birds, other wildlife, and environmental quality. And throughout the course of this webinar series, you will certainly see all of these things in action and how all of the topics connect back to this mission of informing conservation and working towards conservation from a bunch of different angles. So we wanted to do this session tonight, and it's going to be a little bit shorter, I think, than our other speakers, because we just wanted to do an introduction and talk about the key concepts that we have going forward over the next 3 months. This sort of started because we are sometimes asked what some of these topics have to do with birds at all. Sometimes it's pretty obvious, sometimes it's not. So, one of the things that we hope folks will take away is this ecological concept of everything is connected. So, all of these different topics that we're going to be talking about, um, maybe on the surface, it might seem questionable how they relate directly to birds, but hopefully by the end of the series, you'll say, oh, I can see how all of this is really part of the web of life and everything affects everything else. Factors that affect our health and quality of life also affect birds and vice versa. So many of the things that you're going to be hearing about, there might be a bird or wildlife angle being discussed, but all of them affect us as humans as well. I think everyone on here probably knows that wildlife and our environment in general really need our help. And here at MRBO, we truly believe that we can all make a difference, especially as a collective. So our primary purpose for putting together this series and really everything else we do is to raise awareness and to sort of gather folks together into a collective to make really positive change. So in 2022, the State of the Birds report, which comes out annually for the US, raised an alarm, sounded an alarm about steep population losses. So I'm not sure if folks can see, this is pretty small print. Obviously, it's just a screenshot taken directly from that report. But more than half of the bird species that were assessed for the State of the Birds report, 303 out of 529, are experiencing declines. And 70 species are considered tipping point species. They're projected to lose um, a lot more than half again of their population over the next 50 years. So this is pretty alarming and really needs some action. The alarm really started in 2019 with the publication of this paper that you see here in the journal Science. Of course, folks had been noticing and in some cases documenting via studies declines of various bird species populations over a very long period of time. But this particular paper put everything together and looked at the North American avifauna as a whole and found some pretty alarming results. So we've lost almost 3 billion birds since 1970, continent-wide. And you can see here that this made a bit of a splash as well within the popular press. So that's just an example from the New York Times. But this study, I think, really started driving home what a lot of us had been noticing, whether you're an ornithologist or you're a layperson. We've been noticing our birds declining, but this really put the data to that observation. One of the most concerning findings about this study was that it's not just some, maybe rare species in some very specific specialized habitat types. These are some of our most common birds that we are all familiar with from our backyards. So birds like blue jays, Baltimore orioles, white-throated sparrows, and dark-eyed juncos, which are here right now for our Missouri winter, and rose-breasted grosbeaks, which are here in the spring and early summer. So we're seeing these declines across multiple guilds of birds, and including birds that are considered pretty common birds and birds that will come to feeders in our own backyards. Across the North American avifauna, this is what we see when we look at this study and its findings by guild. So you can see that eastern forest birds have declined about 17%. And again, this is in about 50 years since 1970. All the way down here to the really steep declines experienced by our grassland bird guilds. As a guild, they've lost more than half of their population in the last 50 years. So why is this happening? What's going on? There are a lot of different factors. Here are the big ones: habitat loss, toxins, climate issues, pollution in general, collisions, outdoor cats, and light pollution. So one of our colleagues at the International Dark Sky Association once said, and I think he was sort of pitying us for studying birds all the time and studying these declines. And he was like, wow, that's just like death by 1,000 cuts. There's so many different things going on here. So we're going to be addressing many of these topics during this series and learning a lot about them and taking deep dives with experts that have dedicated their lives to studying what we can do about these declines in these contexts. So we'll start briefly with kind of the original, the biggest, certainly the longest running. And I know folks hear about habitat loss a lot. It's a phrase that's used very often for a reason that it is a pervasive cause of bird declines. But what does this really look like on the ground? And what does it look like at scale? Um, this is a slide that we received from the Missouri Prairie Foundation via the Missouri Natural Heritage Database. And I think Ethan might talk a little bit later about like sort of the source of this data. But this is the extent of pre-European settlements of Missouri, our tallgrass prairie. You can see that peach color there. This was the extent of tallgrass prairie in our state. And we had about 14 million acres of tallgrass prairie. And this here is the extent of native unplowed tallgrass prairie today. So you can see we have little pockets of it left in certain places, but nothing like the extent that we once have. So if you take away 14 million acres of a very diverse ecosystem that sustains not just birds, of course, but many, many species, and you whittle that down to about 60,000 acres, which is about what we have right now of unplowed prairie, the logical conclusion is that we're going to lose some of the critters that live in these places. And we're definitely seeing that. So here's again that 53% loss of grassland birds since 1970. And this applies to even birds that are really quite familiar to many of us, such as eastern meadowlark, pretty well-known bird. The other birds here are a loggerhead shrike and a greater prairie chicken. Most unfortunately, in Ethan's and my about 15 years in Missouri, so a very brief time, we've really seen prairie chickens blink out during that time frame. And this loss of our prairie habitat and our high quality grassland habitat does continue to this day. This situation is also true of wetlands, not quite to the extreme extent as our prairies, but bottomland forests like this one and emergent marsh habitat like this that you see here. Of course, over the course of our time here in Missouri, we have drained and plowed and tiled and removed wetlands from throughout the state. So we've lost about 87% of our wetlands in Missouri. So this is an example of what this looks like on the ground. Again, a very diverse ecosystem that is now diminished both in size and in quality. A couple of the birds, just for example, that affected is little guys like this Bachman's warbler here. Small warbler of the bottomland forests has been extinct since the 1980s. And there on the bottom right is king rail. This is a species that lives in emergent marsh habitat. And it's a pretty secretive bird, so it's pretty hard to study. But estimates are that there are only about 10 to 12 breeding pairs in the state right now. So what are we losing habitat to, or what have we lost it to and are continuing to? Here in the state of Missouri, a lot of it is intensive industrial agriculture. Um, Whether that's corn, like you see on the left-hand side here, we have corn production. This is also true of soybean production. Up there on the upper right, you can see a fescue field. And so it looks like grass. And I have to say that, learning over time differences in ecosystems and identifying what is high quality habitat and what is not, it is very easy to drive around Missouri sometimes and see the several million acres of fescue and think that we still have a lot of grasslands left. But this is a monoculture. It's one type of plant. It's not a native plant. And so it certainly does not provide anything like our native prairie habitat. Of course, there's also lots of acreage lost to development and, our homes and lawns and our built environment. So many different reasons, many different factors, but it's resulted in this incredibly just wide scale loss of habitat. And that is sort of foundational to our bird declines. Ethan, I thought you might like to describe a little bit about this slide and the next one, how it's been converted in our own home county here.
Great. We have a lot to thank to Walter Schroeder, who did a lot of quantifying our historic land types throughout Missouri. And these layers are also available through Missouri's Geospatial Data Clearinghouse at MISTIS too. You can find them. If anybody needs them, just reach out to me and I'll help you find them. But this is generally what explorers would how they described the land. Early surveyors described the land as they came across the state. And of course, they had a very Eastern kind of extractive mindset, very timber focused, thinking that would be the most valuable thing in land. So when it came to looking at grasslands, they really didn't realize, like we look at a prairie, we look at that like a coral reef with all of its just rich diversity and all of its ecosystem services, and same thing with wetlands. But they would just be like, yeah, this is kind of wet. And sometimes they would say it's prairie, but oftentimes they describe it as kind of barrens and scrub, real coarse. But this kind of detailed information does give us a good insight of what the historic land types looked like and the extent of them, just as settlement was occurring. This map here is a result of data which is also freely available. They're migrating currently to a new system to be able to input and share data. But this is the USDA's, and they have a national ag statistics database, or a few of them. And this is a result of that. And so you can see here predominantly the colors of yellow representing corn and green representing soy, showing the change in that land use type over time, between that early land use type to now to what we're seeing on the landscape. And these things are also freely available, and if you reach out, I can put you in touch with them. Cool things about this you can use is you can access that data and set it to any sort of extent or area of interest you want and quantify the land use within that geography. Maybe a priority grassland geography or something else. So you can see these changes over time and see what you have to work with in those areas.
So this is our home county. We live right outside of Marshall that you see here in the middle, the gray area. Um, and oftentimes we get questions from folks, what happened to all the quail? There used to be a lot of quail here in Saline County. And if we're able to, we try and show them maps like these and say, there's simply not a lot of habitat left. And what is left is in little tiny, tiny postage stamps, especially in our most heavily cultivated counties, such as Saline County. So connecting back to birds and other wildlife, we've had these huge landscape changes over time. We discussed a little bit about moving towards a monoculture grass system instead of a diverse prairie system. There was a time when, excuse me, our farms were quite a bit more diverse than they are now. So that's what the picture is kind of showing us in the lower right there. But over the last few decades, we've gone from those small sort of patchwork of more diversified cropping farms that had livestock and a number of different crops being grown to an even more monoculture system. And from a wildlife perspective of really any taxon, this is not going to sustain very much. It simply isn't. So the changes over certainly the last 150 years or so, but even just over the last 50 are readily apparent if you start looking at the historic land use in our area. In addition to that actual, specific habitat loss, acreage converted, we've also seen, of course, an enormous amount of changes in methods and inputs. And a lot of this has been very chemically driven. And so we're also experiencing a situation very much on top of habitat loss where we're using a lot of toxins on our landscape. A good friend and colleague of ours has coined the phrase toxifying our landscape. And that's really what we're doing when we're applying enormous amounts of chemical inputs across an enormous amount of acreage. I wanted to share this with you. Some folks may have seen this before. It's a really good resource. It's a little disconcerting, but this is from the USGS, and I'm gonna hit play here, and it's just gonna show you a video basically of the use of it, so we can check out how many pesticides are being used, and of course, in varying densities. And I do want to note that pesticide is a very broad category, right? So this includes herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, of course. So there's a lot of different things going on here. I chose glyphosate, as you can see. You can see the density of application in 2019. You can check out what crops and the trends over time in use. And you can look back. I've gone now and clicked on 2000, and we see a smaller input, lower input of glyphosate in 2000, and then I'm clicking back to 1992, and you can see that this is something that has been more and more and more used over time. And this is the estimated use on agricultural land. It is also used in home and garden settings as well, of course. So there's a lot of things going on here. We're in some cases using insecticides to directly kill insects, but we're also causing the decline of native flora, native plants in general, and the effects of that sort of multiply. So here's just a couple graphs from a native landscaping for wildlife and people book that was published by our Missouri Department of Conservation. And you can see that it's been shown by many studies that our native plants support a higher biomass of native insects and also a higher diversity of native insects. So many different factors contributing to not just a loss of diversity in plants, but also in insects as well. And how does this relate to birds? Well, very directly. Even species that we think of often as seed-eating birds, so and that do in fact eat seeds for a lot of their lives, such as northern cardinal, is a good example. Some of our sparrows that come to our feeders, they're eating seeds all the time, right? Well, even so, during the nesting season, almost all of our birds use insect protein to feed their young. So insect declines are going to affect every species, even if they're omnivorous or more seed oriented throughout the whole year. So the final thing regarding our very broad agricultural system is this, and I'm gonna turn it over to Ethan now.
Yes, when you have this sort of system, which is our current food system, where you see landscape primarily homogenized into corn and soybeans, that also requires a substantial um, amount of inputs, fertilizers and things, and um, it also the corn and soy goes in to feed those uh, large concentrations of animals in feedlots and confined situations, and that's really not very sustainable in the landscape because it produces a lot of excess of nutrients, and we're already kind of over applying nutrients to that landscape. And so this map here was something that was generated by Dr. Chris Jones up in Iowa, and who's going to be later a speaker in this series. And these are Iowa watersheds. They're all we have many series of hydrological units, but this particular size of watershed, so all the water kind of flows into this, is caught in this particular geography. In any event, this is the city equivalent of human waste to what is now animal waste in these pretty much wrecked Iowa watersheds. So we have generated similar maps. Fortunately, not quite as bad, but it's getting increasingly bad here in Missouri too. And so all these factors from the inputs to the outputs in the entire system are degrading our habitats and our ecosystems that we and our birds depend upon.
Thanks, Eth. So Ethan just mentioned Dr. Chris Jones. He is our last speaker in this series, and he's going to be talking about various aspects of water quality and how we're not really equipped to manage this much waste and other detrimental inputs into our watersheds. Also speaking on various agriculture and pesticide and herbicide related topics are Robbie Dorhoff of the Missouri Department of Conservation about chemical use and its effects on ecosystems. And Charles Miller is going to join us. He is going to be speaking about policy in the Missouri State House, and many of the things that he'll be speaking about are related to water quality policy and agriculture. We also have grassland biologist and rancher Steve Klubine speaking, who is going to be giving us a solutions-oriented, very positive and optimistic discussion about how we can not have these things happen and how we can build a better system. Speaking of environmental quality, plastic. I know a lot of folks that have been working with Merbo over years know that this is an issue that we work on quite a bit. And I believe that there are some folks from the Columbia Garden Club on this call. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about this very much. You don't have to listen to it twice in one day. I had the privilege of talking to the Columbia, Missouri Garden Club today for about an hour about plastics. So this is certainly an issue that is gaining more and more prominence in not just the minds and work of environmentalists, but just amongst the general public. And part of it is seeing things like this. The end pollution of plastic is simply undeniable. And I think that everyone globally has noticed it. Um, we're starting to see more and more pictures like this one from all over the world, even from uninhabited, very remote islands. Our plastic waste is something that we are not dealing with. And there are other issues associated with it as well, which are, of course, that it is something that is ever present. It does not break down. Um, its extraction and production, we will see, is making a significant contribution to climate issues. And also, there is much emerging research from both the human medical sector and the wildlife health sector, such as this right here, just for example, showing that there are a lot of toxins associated with these products that are simply increasing in use and have been increasing in use for several decades. So, one of our speakers, Rebecca Kreshkoff, is coming to us live from New York City. She's with the Beyond Plastic Speakers Bureau and is the founder of a local Beyond Plastics affiliate as well. She is going to give us a really deep dive into all of these factors related to plastics so that we can have a very comprehensive view of this issue and what we can all do about it. We're almost done with the bad stuff, everyone. So some of the causes of mortality that we consider more direct, habitat loss, toxicity, plastics, those are things that are very broad scale problems and they can be very diffuse. When I speak of direct mortality, I'm speaking of event occurs, bird dies, individual birds. So you can see here that some of the biggest direct killers of North America's birds are outdoor cats, huge impact, and window collisions. As folks on here know, I think many of you know that there are various projects in Missouri going on for safe passage of birds so that things like the occurrence on the left-hand side here, this is in Crown Center in Kansas City, so that those do not happen nearly as much. We are working to reduce the problem of window collisions that's happening in Kansas City and St. Louis and Springfield and Columbia right now. But we do have a couple of speakers that are going to be talking to us about some of these direct causes of mortality. Um, Another factor that is affecting our birds, and we need to keep in mind that a lot of our birds migrate at night. Most of our species that are migrant do migrate at night. And so the growth of light pollution across the country and the globe is affecting them in many ways, and causing ever further mortality and decline. So this is showing you our light pollution as a country in the 1950s, and this is now. This is having a significant effect on not just migrating birds, but other species as well. Um, this is a slide from our friend Brett Seymour showing a comprehensive study of other studies looking at the impacts of light pollution on insect populations. So there are many, many factors at play here, and we have a couple of different speakers, Crystal Antone of Johnson County Community College and Dr. Travis Longcore of UCLA are going to speak to us on these direct causes of mortality and how we can help reduce them. So lots of concerning issues, lots of things that are causing environmental degradation and declines in our bird populations. But this is what we think. We think it doesn't have to be this way. We built these systems and we can build better systems. We can choose in a vast variety of ways, individually and collectively as a society, to not have these factors that are toxifying our landscape or causing direct bird mortality. So we are hoping that the deep dives into all of these topics that you will be hearing about as part of this learning series will raise your awareness and hopefully inspire you to engagement and action and potentially even activism, or if you preferred the word advocacy. Folks that work with Merbo know that we have lots and lots and lots and lots of different partner organizations, as well as just different organizations across the country and the world, really, that we learn from. Um, and one of those is our various Audubon societies, whether local chapters or state offices, such as this, New Hampshire Audubon. And Ethan and I came across um, some things on their website that we thought were really useful and really informative, as do many Audubon societies, bird observatories, conservation organizations. Um, there are lists of what you can do as an individual or a business, or, if you're an elected official with a municipality or whatever. Um, and a lot of those individual actions center around some of the everyday things that we can do to help birds. And those are wonderful. And there are the 7 simple actions for bird conservation is one of those frameworks. And we have a few different webinars on that topic that have been recorded previously. And those are individual level actions. But one of the things that we found interesting was that New Hampshire Audubon also has this list of actions that you can do as an individual that affect much larger levels. And I know that sometimes these things can be a little bit intimidating. Um, one of the things that has helped me is really getting to know my topics and learning as much as I possibly can about them. And so that is basically the ideals behind this series. We hope that folks that attend will feel that they come away with enough information that they can not only make individual changes in their own lives, but so they feel more comfortable advocating for things like this that you see here that affect us all, whether that's, in your social circles or whether it's you want to go to Jefferson City and talk to our elected officials about these things.
It's interesting that you mention it right now, Dana, as we speak. I think even with the weather, they're having hearings in Missouri State Capitol right now at the Natural Resources Committee is discussing two bills that are really important to deal with water quality. And if we don't know what's going on and we can't be informed about those topics, then we're really powerless to do much of anything. So and also you can find out about the groups that are right there right now and dealing with topics that we care about throughout the year. And if you can't make it in some way, maybe help them out or at least get in touch and learn from them what are the topics of the day.
Thanks. So quickly, I want to just tell you this is the most important part of this whole evening right here. Tell you about all of our awesome speakers that are coming up over the next 11 weeks. So next week, we will start with Charles Miller, speaking of the Missouri State Capitol in Jefferson City. Charles is going to be telling us all about environmentally related policies that are moving or proposed in our capital in 2024. The next week, Dr. Christine Brodsky from Pittsburgh State University is going to be talking to us about urban biodiversity and trends thereof from the global to local scale. Her talk is entitled Nearby Nature. The week after that, Rebecca Kreshkoff is going to give us a deep dive into plastics. Her talk is The Problems with Plastics is Worse Than You Think. And I would definitely have to agree with that. It's a topic that I think has become absolutely crucial that we are all educated on. On February 5th, we have Steve Bubak, entomologist with the Missouri Department of Conservation, talking about rare insects of Missouri and their conservation. So the foundation of wildlife life. The week after that, we have Dr. Longcore, UCLA Institute of the Environment and Sustainability, who will be sharing with us some of the findings of his intensive research into light pollution and its effects on birds. February 19th, our friend Sarah Kendrick, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, she will be giving us a deep dive into coffee and birds. So I know sometimes folks hear about drink shade grown coffee. Sarah's going to tell us about all the ecological connections and why that's important. February 26th, we have Steve Klubine, who I mentioned earlier. He's going to talk to us about beef production and how that can be harnessed um, to conserve grassland birds in Missouri, particularly. The week after that, we have Dr. Doug Tallamy. He might be known to many of you. He is going to be presenting on that we are all nature's best hope. March 11th, Robbie Dorhoff, Missouri Department of Conservation forest entomologist, is going to be speaking on dicamba and 2,4-D and trees. These are chemicals that have been around a while, but they are causing new problems these days. I don't know if some folks saw Robbie's talk for the Missouri Prairie Foundation a few months ago, but when I saw that talk, I said, Robbie, can you please come present for us as well? Really informative. And then finally, our last two talks, Crystal Antone of Johnson County Community College Center for Sustainability is going to be talking about creating safer passages for migrating birds. And we will finish the series with Dr. Chris Jones, who we spoke a little bit about earlier. He has a recent book out called The Swine Republic, which are essays on the struggles with the truth about water quality. So wonderful lineup. I am going to try and find a way to put something in the chat for you all, even though I can't see much. I will do that at the very end. I'm going to go ahead and I'll put a link to the full descriptions of every talk that you can easily download so that you can check that out.
Very good. In the meantime here, I've answered a couple questions. Thank you very much in the Q&A. And there's a couple more comments, questions, and the things in the chat that we can address um, at the end
I
here.
Yeah, I want to finish up with something
Yep.
positive.
Yeah.
Um, These graphics are associated with that same study that we started with at the beginning, the study that was in Science in 2019, showing that we've lost about 3 billion birds over the last 50 years. And you all remember the different guilds that had declined. Well, one of the things, though, that was noted was that there were some guilds that had actually gained in populations. So you can see here waterfowl, raptors, and woodpeckers. And I'm hoping that folks will put in the chat why they think that those guilds have actually done better and increased over the course of the data being collected since 1970. What things would have affected waterfowl and raptors and woodpeckers that would have helped them out? Don't be shy. Habitat restoration, hunting, question mark,
Game
game
species,
species, yep. Adaptable enough behaviorally. That's true, certainly of some of our woodpeckers, right?
elimination
Raptors,
of DDT.
DDT. Yep,
Yeah.
yep, yep.
Suburban woodlots, general death.
So the ban on DDT, that's a huge one for raptors. And including our national symbol, of course, bald eagles. Ethan, do you remember how many nests there are in Missouri now? It's hundreds.
No,
It's
no, we
hundreds.
got up to
It's
200. We stopped counting.
stopping DDT, yeah. So I would also add to that good science-based forest conservation practices. And I think that some people sort of mentioned that there was some discussion of woodlots in the chat and things like that. Hunters, waterfowl hunters, someone mentioned game species in general. That is true. We had things like the North American Wetlands Conservation Act that helped our waterfowl. We also had the Clean Water Act, right? And the Endangered Species Act. Reducing clear cutting forest. Yes, I see that. Yep. Um, so we have bans on DDT and things like the Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, Wetlands Conservation Act, and I wonder what folks think that those things would have in common. So if folks remember their history, um, the the people that were making large amounts of profits off things like manufacturing DDT and um, converting habitat that was pushing wildlife species out and polluting rivers and streams before the Clean Water Act, they all decided that they wanted to be regulated and make a little less money. No, just kidding. We demanded it. And a lot of people are putting this in the chat. That's great. It took activists to get them passed, advocacy by various organizations, creation of the Missouri Department of Conservation and other organizations. Yeah. Basically, people got together and they said, we don't want to continue seeing a dirty environment and declines in our birds. And so we are the ones that made those things happen. And there's no reason that we can't do that today. So hopefully you all will come to our series. If you can't actually join at the time, they are all going to be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. Thank you very much for joining us. And Eth, you said that there were questions and
Yeah, yeah, there's some really great ones in here, and And there are some ones earlier too that will also review all the comments and things internally too after the presentations. But what are those organizations that we would advocate for to the legislator? So what organizations might have those key insights, and what organizations could people reach out to if that are strong advocates? And it's a great question. I can kind of start out and answer a little bit of that and say there's a myriad of organizations out there. There's big kind of umbrella groups out there, like the Conservation Federation of Missouri, which really keeps active. And that organization is, I would say, democratically empowered by its membership. It's got like 100 and some affiliate organizations. And if people get involved and engaged with it, they can help form resolutions and policy stances, and they do so every year. Right now, we're going through a big resolution process with that organization. I chair a committee that's reviewing environmental and ecology resolutions right now, and looks like we got about four or so that we'll be submitting this year. But this is all stakeholder input that helps drive the organization. There's also there's a host of organizations. Stream Teams United has a really good list of current legislative things going on. They're great advocates. The Missouri Coalition for the Environment, Sierra Clubs. There's just a ton of good groups out there that really put the time and resources together, not only to go to the Capitol, but also to help inform people. Some of our friends in one of the problems is we've been really siloed into our little specific niches. So it'd be like the Audubon Society or some other different desperate groups, not always working together. And fortunately, today in modern times, we're getting to build a better synergy and collective action together. So we're working with people like the Missouri Rural Crisis Center, who's been standing up for small family farmers since the 80s, doing tremendous amount of heavy lifting there. And traditionally we didn't connect with those groups, but now we can and have that opportunity. So try to avoid thinking in silos when you're thinking about reaching out to other groups to advocate with. Dana, do you want to add any? I'm sorry if I missed any groups. Missouri Prairie Foundation does a great job advocating for grassland type bills and things like that. And everybody's got their own special areas that they work in, and some are more broad based than others, and some are more niche related. So.
No, it's there's that was a great summary, I think, of especially of folks that we work really closely with. I would just add to your comment about not working in silos that there is finally a lot of intersection in environmental work and human health work. And I see that a lot in um, the realm of plastics, particularly, but it is taking place as far as other topics are concerned as well. And I think that for a really long time, the narrative was like, okay, environmentalists, you do your thing over here, and social justice people, you do your thing over here, and human health people, you do the thing over here. But the factors that are affecting all of us and all of the things that we care about and work for are ultimately the same. There's systemic issues and challenges that we need to address in a much more holistic perspective. So if that's what your comment
Yes,
about,
absolutely. I mean,
working across sectors.
yeah, if you think about how our birds or habitats are really hurting, or these real serious kind of environmental problems and things, um, what we've really missed the mark on and overlooked over the years is that the human communities, the ones on the front lines, often the worst affected, because we have overlooked those and they've been underserved. It's been underserving the whole collective purpose, So it's really great to uh, think collectively and holistically about these solutions.
Thank you, Taylor Jones, the One Health Initiative. Yes.
Yep, that's it.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so we have So Katie asked if we could provide resources to
I
keep us
think
up to date. So there's a few of them we just listed there. CFM has the Legislative Action Center. Stream Teams has their thing. MCE has their things. You go to their websites. We can provide some of those lists here. A lot of these are affiliates of the Conservation Federation too. Then there's and bigger national issues. Look at National Wildlife Federation too. But
beyond plastics.
yeah, beyond
There-
plastics,
There's a lot. I
absolutely.
started thinking of national organizations as well, and there are a
Yep.
lot of wonderful ones.
Dark
Christine put,
sky.
yep, International Dark Sky, Missouri Dark Sky,
Yeah.
NRDC, Natural Resources Defense Council is an important one. Agreed. There are a lot of wonderful organizations. I know it can be overwhelming to try and keep up with everything. Um, I guess I would advise, especially for folks whose hearts are in certain topics. I think we all have our, certain things that we get most inspired about. Just maybe follow a couple of organizations at one time and get their updates and their legislation updates as well as just their events. And work with them. There are many that we can literally work with in person. Missouri River Relief is another one that comes to
Oh
mind.
yeah.
Um, it looks like there's a couple of related questions in the Q&A. Someone asks, what organization is the host of this series? And it's us, Missouri River Bird Observatory. Can we suggest more topics? Yes. And to who? That would be us. Relatedly, Janet asks future topics to include impacts on birds from wind and solar industries. And Janet, we don't have that on the list right now, but I think if you all saw the last slide, we're already actually adding a series of webinars in April, and we're already starting to plan for fall and next winter. So I'm going to put my email in the chat, and I would be delighted to have topic suggestions from people. Would love to have that.
I don't want to miss that one question there from Brenda, which is great. As we go through each topic, I presume we'll also be given info about what we can do in addition to advocacy. And that's just a great question because that certainly will be threaded through every topic as kind of a call to action, but with the understanding that each and every one of you, some of you might not want to speak to legislators, some of you might not want to speak to a community, but you all have your own special talents and that you'll find some way to do something. And we want to kick the doors open so that you have that opportunity to find a way that you can do something.
There's the comment in the chat about regenerative farming, permaculture, or sectors that are gaining ground and advocating for environmental and human health, water and air quality, and species biodiversity. Absolutely. Find your niche. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions? Great chat, everyone. Thank you very much.
I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. Great
Um,
dialogue.
just to just to reiterate, I put my email in the chat. Would love to hear from y'all. And then a little bit up in the chat is a link to a document with the descriptions, full descriptions of all the talks that are coming up. So not just the date, but what the talks are about.
I see a comment coming in there from Barbara about indoor cats, outdoor cats, and feral cats, and that their organizations or a control plan. Barbara, you can always reach out to us. But in the meantime, I would suggest going to the American Bird Conservancy's website. Go to ABC. They've got a lot of great information about cats. Everything from providing catios to what solutions have worked and what not. And they're a wealth of resources there.
And yay for your indoor cats. Thank you for mentioning that.
A lot of cat topics. Yeah.
Yep. So I don't think folks can see this until we say answer live, but someone says a good topic would be how we can band together to start dialing back the outdoor killer cat problem, not just for birds, but all small wildlife. Absolutely. Estimates of small mammal and even reptile and amphibian mortality are even higher than birds, which is staggering. All right, if nobody has any more questions, we'll go ahead and end. It's 7:29. So thank you all so much for being
See
here. We
you
really
soon.
appreciate it. And yep, see you next week, hopefully.
Thank you.